Hello and welcome to episode 287 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick here as always with
Jason Rabinowitz. Hello, Ian. How's it going?
Hello, Jason. It's going well. It's going well. Fall is here. We have passed the autumnal equinox.
That's
we are
true.
now into shorter and shorter days.
Yeah, the calendar we've all rely on day to day has caught up with the airline industry in determining that summer is officially over.
Indeed, indeed. Summer is over, fall is here, and as we go into the winter season, I guess, as far as IATA is concerned, I always felt like if we're only going to have two seasons, we should rename them something instead of just summer and winter.
Not peak.
Peak and not peak. Good and bad.
Yeah.
This week, it's Wednesday, September 25th. We have some things on the calendar that haven't quite happened yet that we'll get to talk about a little bit more next week. Southwest is hosting their Investor Day. Normally not something that we would really dig into on this podcast, but this year's a little bit different because this year's Southwest Investor Day is promising to
Things are going to change.
To all of the changes that Southwest is going to implement exactly during the coming year as they seek to continue to fend off Elliott Investment Management's play to take over the airline, get rid of all of the executives and board members and run it their way. Southwest executives saying, no, we've got a plan, and we'll hear more about that plan tomorrow, the 26th, so we'll talk about that on next week's episode. A bit of news already so far from Southwest this week with a bit of route shuffling, shall we say. No surprises, really. Southwest kind of not pulling out of Atlanta, but certainly diminishing their presence there. Southwest's presence in Atlanta, not all that old, really.
No, it was AirTran's hub, I believe, that I think what Southwest inherited from AirTran back when that merger went on. So that was, I think AirTran was an AirTran hub, right?
I can't remember if it was a hub, but they definitely had a big presence there.
It was an operating base. I don't know if
there you go.
I don't know if they called it a hub, but according to Wikipedia, AirTran's operating bases were Atlanta, Baltimore, Milwaukee, and Orlando. So it was definitely a very important city to AirTran, which Southwest inherited, which in 2024, now they say, yeah, not so much.
Yeah. So they're making big changes there, and we'll have even bigger changes, we're pretty sure, tomorrow, and we'll talk about those next week. A bit of follow-up from last week's episode. We talked about the Alaska Airlines and Hawaiian Airlines merger receiving Department of Transportation approval. That merger has now gone through. They are now merged and have started doing all sorts of things to make that happen. And one of those things is a new kind of consolidation of their new cargo unit, which is exciting because we were talking about, how silly it would be if Hawaiian got rid of its intra-island flying. It'd be like Alaska getting rid of the milk run. Well, those things are safe because the cargo unit is in full swing. So good news there.
Yeah. And you can now, as a code share, book Hawaiian Airlines flights on the Alaska Air website. And I think maybe the other way around too. But as we speak right now, I just did a search from JFK to Honolulu on alaska.com, and look at that. Hawaiian showed up. That's fun.
There you go.
No more stopping on the West Coast. You could just go all the way now.
There you go. Off you go. We'll see Jason at the end of the show.
Well, we'll see what the mile redemptions are like.
Yeah, probably not very good.
Oh, no.
No. Yeah. So last week we talked about Boeing's offer that had been tentatively approved by the machinists union and then voted down, resoundingly so. This week we have what Boeing is terming a best and final contract offer.
Sounds a lot like last and final boarding call, which
last and final
is never true. It's never
for
the case.
All ticketed and confirmed passengers. Jason, get on board.
This is the last and best and final boarding and offer contract call. It's not gone over particularly well, has it?
Decidedly not. So let's talk about what's in this revised contract offer, and then we'll talk about what the machinists union thinks about that. So We now have Boeing offering a 30% general wage increase over the life of the contract. It was 25. There is now a $6,000 ratification bonus that was previously $3,000. The AMPP bonus is reinstated. That had previously been eliminated in favor of contributions elsewhere, but now Boeing says, okay, we'll bring this particular program back. And then Boeing will increase the company match of the Boeing 401k to 100% of the first 8% of the pay that you contribute if you're a machinist, plus continue an automatic 4% company contribution. That was previously 75% of 8%. So good old-fashioned math here. But the contract, such as it is, does not seem to in any way, shape, or form interest the machinist union rank and file. The union leadership took a poll of the union members and they said, nah, we're not interested. So not really clear where things go from here. We haven't heard much progress as far as negotiations are concerned, and Boeing is calling this its best and final contract offer. So,
I don't know. And things are getting a little weird. Remember that initially the offer brought to the union members was brought to them via the union. Boeing communicated an offer to the union representation, who then disseminated that message down to the union members, who resoundingly did not take the recommendation to accept it. And 98% said absolutely not. And this time it's a little weirder in that you have Boeing not actually communicating the new offer to the union representation, but basically directly to union members via almost the media. The union representation did not like this, of course. So they said they didn't have time to go over it. We don't even have time to set up the infrastructure to take a vote. This isn't going to work. So Boeing gave some more time for members to go over this. But I can see both sides of this argument, how initially the union leadership said, hey, here's an offer from Boeing. We recommend you take it. And then 98% of people actually voting turn it down. So maybe I understand why Boeing is going around union representation, since the recommendation at first was so overwhelmingly ignored. But it's not a good look, I don't think, going around the union. But at this point, I don't know. I'm out of my element here.
Yeah, I mean, to my mind, it doesn't seem like it helped reset the relationship between Boeing and the union.
No, it certainly did not. It did not help.
If that's the goal, if the goal, and this is the stated goal of Boeing's new CEO, Kelly Ortberg, to reset the relationship between the company and the union, if that was the goal, I dare say they failed.
Yeah, things are not going well, and it's very unclear what it's going to take, at least from our perspective, to end this strike. What is it that the machinists want, and what's it going to take to get Boeing to revise its best and final, we swear, last offer? We're closing the boarding door offer.
Underscore final, underscore no really this time.
V2 2024.
Exactly.
Yeah, this doesn't seem like it's ending tomorrow, but you never know. We saw it with the Air Canada pilots just a couple weeks ago, where all of a sudden it was, we're on strike, we're going to go on strike, and then somebody snapped their fingers and, all right, no strike. But
for now,
that
one still hasn't been ratified
now. Yeah, we're already in the strike, so we've gone past that point. But what it's going to take to ratify a contract or approve a tentative deal, I don't know. Things are not looking like they're going to be resolved by the time this podcast comes out on Friday.
No. And meanwhile, Boeing's beginning its furlough program that it introduced or laid out last week. And the other professional union, SPIA, which is the engineering union that works for Boeing, said no furloughs. We're not doing that. That's not in our contract. Not going to happen. So,
okay,
there you go. But non-union employees can look forward to a 3 weeks on, 1 week off for the duration coming up. In a follow-up to a story that we brought you a few weeks ago, a further investigation of the Rolls-Royce Trent XWB 97 engine on the Cathay Pacific A350-1000, that was a lot of numbers and hyphens. They found out that the cause was a ruptured fuel manifold hose. So that was the kind of instigation of the fire and in-flight engine shutdown. EASA, through its investigation, has linked the degradation of those particular hoses to a, quote, suspect cleaning process used on those hoses. So they've issued a revised airworthiness directive that instructs operators with not only Trent 97s, but also the 84s that power some of the A350-900s, depending on when they had their last shop visit, to be inspected to make sure that that cleaning process was not used on those hoses and to make sure that the hoses are okay. They were found to, quote, have either frayed metal braids or collapsed structures inside the hose.
You don't want that in your high-pressure fuel hose.
Certainly do not.
You don't want that, but this is good news, I guess. They were able to figure out what happened, figure out that the damage here is limited to a cleaning program of all things, and that this isn't some sort of manufacturing defect, or worst of all, an unknown reason. So this is going to become a distant memory pretty quickly, it seems like.
Yeah, it sounds like they've got this figured out, and they know what to look for, and they know how to prevent it from happening again. So,
mission accomplished.
Investigations. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Good job. This is an interesting one that I am very confused by.
Okay.
I get where they're coming from, but I can't, for the life of me, see how this is a good idea.
You could be talking about a great many things right now.
What I'm currently talking about is the Canadian government's transport adjudicator, their office within their Department of Transport that deals with airline complaints. They are planning to charge the airline subject to the complaint nearly 800 Canadian dollars, which is nearly 600 US dollars, for every customer complaint that the transport watchdog needs to resolve, whether or not they find in the customer's favor or the airline's favor.
Okay.
So if you fly Air Canada or WestJet or any other Canadian airline and something goes wrong, and you, as the passenger, file a formal complaint, or you
perceive that something is going wrong. Remember, to file a complaint, nothing actually has to go wrong. You could complain that the temperature on board the aircraft is a little too cold.
And if the Canadian Transport Agency has to resolve the complaint, so if the airline settles with this person, that's fine. They don't have to pay. If the person withdraws the complaint, they don't have to pay. But if the CTA, the Canadian Transport Agency, becomes involved such that they make a ruling on that complaint, they would charge the airline $600 roughly US for their trouble.
This is just go on.
The CTA says that it's 60% of the cost of resolving a complaint. So it's roughly $1,000 US to resolve a complaint. And the agency resolves upwards of 22,500 complaints every year. So it adds up. I mean, it's an operating budget.
They say it results in about 29.8 million Canadian dollars per year.
So about 25 million.
That's a lot.
US dollars.
That's a lot,
Yeah.
But that's the cost of being a government regulator. Like, this is the task that you collect tax revenue for. Like, this is the job of government.
I could certainly understand if they resolve the complaint and rule against the airline. The airline would have to pay.
Yeah, there's definitely a need for that. Air Canada, especially after COVID, had a huge number of complaints because it simply just wasn't refunding anyone at any point. It took years, and I think the US DOT, or was it the FAA, actually had like a record fine against Air Canada for just not issuing refunds. So maybe Air Canada had it coming, but this does not seem like a prudent decision.
Yeah, this feels half-baked to me.
Yeah.
It feels like, we should do something. Something needs to be done. And then they didn't go beyond that.
Maybe they should work on a system of credits and debits where, they'll charge you $582 US if there's a complaint, but they'll credit you back $300 if there's a consumer compliment that's submitted. Remember, that is a thing. You can
that
do
is
that.
A thing, and they are I wouldn't say ultra rare, but
they are few and far between. I actually, way back when, probably 10 years ago, I happened to notice it by reading the DOT consumer report that they put out every month for airlines, that in the column right next to complaints is a column for compliments. And every now and then there's a non-zero number in there. So I actually submitted a federal Freedom of Information Act request to get those compliments and read them and see what are people so impressed by with airlines that they are writing to the federal government to compliment that airline. And yeah, it does happen. And it's just kind of mundane stuff like, hey, I had a really good flight and like my connection was good. I should submit another one of those requests to see what they look like in 2024. Yeah. But they do happen. So maybe credit the airlines back if they've been good.
See, I think this is a plan.
Yeah.
You know what? We should write into the Canadian Transportation Authority and say, hey.
Wait, they're going to charge somebody for that. I don't know who. Maybe it comes out of NAV Canada's budget. I don't know. But I feel like this has the opportunity to be abused where someone's going to have a vendetta against WestJet or something like that. And they're just every single flight they take, they're going to submit a complaint about something. Because there's always something to complain about. That's the whole basis of social media. There's always something to complain about on a flight. But also, what's stopping from like one Canadian airline for booking 200 tickets on a competitor and having all of those employees fly and be like, my food wasn't hot enough, so we're submitting a complaint. Like, that would add up to a substantial loss for that other airline. Like, I can't imagine an airline doing something that malicious, but like, I don't know.
But it could certainly lead to an increased number of complaints, or at least just encourage people that were maybe not going to complain, but they know that if they fill out the form, it's going to cost the airline some money. So even if they don't win, they still get to stick it to the airline.
All right. Yeah, that's probably fair. I mean, ironically enough, I just finally heard back from Delta today from a DOT complaint I filed last month. And all the reply is we got a lot of these right now. So we'll reply to you or not eventually.
Or not.
I don't know. It just says, hey, we've gotten your complaint from the DOT and we'll deal with it. But we've got a lot because of, quote, the July disruption to Delta's operation.
The July disruption to the Delta. That's amazing.
That's a new one. At least it doesn't say.
It's like a euphemism.
Yeah, like we all know what it is. Just say what it is. But yeah, complaints happen. They're real. But being this punitive seems oddly not very Canadian. Very punitive.
Very, very strange to me that this just doesn't seem all the way thought through. In news that is interesting to me because I'm not sure how this is all going to work. JetBlue is adding lounges to its offering for some people.
Some people, but not most. So JetBlue has, in the not all that long lifespan, has gone from everyone is equal, everyone gets the same seat on board, to a very differentiated airline now, of course, with different types of business classes even, and a couple years ago introduced transatlantic flights. But one thing they never had was lounges, even when they introduced Mint service, which was the business class transcontinental service between New York and California, and eventually all over the map. Lounges were never really a thing that JetBlue got into, except now apparently they will in 2025, but only for Mint passengers flying on transatlantic flights, or for passengers with a fancy new premium JetBlue credit card that does not exist yet, or for the top tier JetBlue elite passengers. There's only going to be two announced so far, JFK and Boston to follow that later. But it's an interesting move for an airline that is doing things to cut costs and be leaner and make more money. I guess they've done the math and somehow adding the expense of lounges in their Northeast airports only for transatlantic passengers will bring in more potential passengers for those flights. They have to have done the math on that.
I mean, one certainly assumes that they've done the math, but the math is a mystery to me as far as the customer that I think of booking a ticket to fly transatlantically on JetBlue is not, to me, the customer that really, really, really values spending more time in the airport.
The one time I flew JetBlue transatlantic, I got there very close in before boarding for my flight because it's just honestly Terminal 5 just isn't the kind of place I want to linger all that long. But building a lounge, especially at somewhere like JFK, is hugely expensive. Building anything at JFK is very expensive. I've heard stories before where you have to have a permit to literally tighten a screw in places like in terminals in New York that are operated by or not operated, but leased out by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. So construction is hugely expensive, and it's not going to be very big. I think it was only like 8,000 square feet in New York and 6,000 square feet in Boston. That sounds like a lot, but Delta's new Delta One lounge in the same airport, JFK and Terminal 4, is something like 40,000 square feet. And yeah, JetBlue has
Still be a line.
Yeah, well, JetBlue has a tiny percentage of the transatlantic flights that Delta and its partners does, but that's not very big. But we'll see if this makes a difference. It's certainly interesting, unexpected.
Yeah, very unexpected. We should have expected this next story, given last week's news. And then I think this order came out as soon as we hit stop on the recording. Not huge news, but certainly worth mentioning because we mentioned the Airbus side of the order last week. China Development Bank leasing arm has ordered 50 Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft, which came the same week as the 80 A320neo family aircraft. These particular MAX will be delivered between 2028 and 2031. Those will come faster than the A320neo family aircraft, which are supposed to be delivered between 2030 and 2032.
Well, we'll see how long the strike goes on for.
There is that. Speaking of leasing aircraft, this is an interesting one, and I'm surprised it took this long for this type of arrangement to happen, given how things have gone over the past couple of years. But we're finally seeing a league-wide leasing arrangement coming out of the NBA. So basketball teams will have access to, eventually, 13 A321neo family aircraft. All of these aircraft are going to be operated in VIP configuration by Delta, which currently operates an aging fleet of VIP configured aircraft. I believe mostly 757.
The agiest 757s around.
Yeah.
Operating. I think most of these are 30 plus years old at Delta. So this was bound to happen. But this, like you said, this is really overdue and interesting. But I think the NBA is in a unique position, at least from American sport leagues, to be able to do this, since we know that a bunch of NFL teams actually have their own owned aircraft outright. But NFL teams travel with a huge amount of personnel and equipment, and basketball teams are much, much leaner. They could all fit on not just a 321, but a highly customized VIP, very nice A321neo.
Yeah.
There's no timing for when this is going to happen. It'll happen eventually, at some point.
Eventually. Yeah.
Eventually. I don't think Delta has actually confirmed this news, but this was originally broken by Corporate Jet Investor. I've not heard of them before, so kudos to them for breaking this scoop. But that's really cool. I'd expect other leagues to follow suit like this.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And Jason makes a good point. You know, the basketball teams travel so much lighter than football teams. But I think the thing could work similarly for baseball teams. You know, not a huge roster of players and not so much equipment that you can't toss it in the hole.
Yeah, I think a lot of baseball teams, including the New York teams, do actually use Delta 757s as well, which I think earlier this year, actually, in the beginning of the season, the Yankees were leaving Miami and one of these elderly 75s broke down and they didn't get out of Miami until like 3 a.m. or something. And if you have a game starting 1 p.m. the next day, that's a big deal. Not great. So I could understand why sourcing some new or simply less ancient aircraft would be a benefit for the league.
Yeah, exactly. Let's go to news that doesn't matter in the slightest, but the only reason I'm even remotely interested in talking about it is we might see a Eurostar train in a SkyTeam livery now.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
On the heels 2 years ago of Deutsche Bahn being incorporated or inducted as an intermodal partner of Star Alliance, now we have Eurostar, I guess, applying or intending to become a member or an intermodal member of SkyTeam in 2025. This one is a lot less of a big deal. Deutsche Bahn is huge with ties to most every major German airport and a lot of international, far-reaching network for Deutsche Bahn, even though it is Deutsche Bahn. And if you're taking an ICE train to your flight, you're probably going to miss it anyway. So it's a good thing they're a part of Star Alliance at this point. But Eurostar has a meager network compared to Deutsche Bahn. The only airport I believe they even really serve is Amsterdam, and that might be cut next year due to track work. I think they kind of sort of serve Paris like a couple times a week maybe, but there's not a lot of detail on what benefit there would be for this, since I believe KLM has already had a long-standing codeshare with Eurostar. So I don't know.
The benefit is a possible SkyTeam livery on the Eurostar train.
That might be it. Or even better, a Eurostar special livery on a SkyTeam airplane.
Okay, now
you're interested.
We're talking. Now
I flipped it on you.
You have piqued my interest, good sir.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we'll see what happens with this. I don't expect anything groundbreaking, but what's left for oneworld? I don't know. Who's Amtrak?
Sorry.
Hey, United did have a code share with Amtrak up until 2020 and COVID. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe JR out in Japan for JAL.
That would actually, that would actually make sense.
That would make sense. Let's do that.
You get on that, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to Kazakhstan.
Okay. What are we doing in Kazakhstan?
We're adding fuel tanks so that we can get from Kazakhstan to London.
Okay. This is an interesting one, and we're trying to piece together what exactly is happening, since details are kind of light. But Air Astana currently has a flight to London, but it unfortunately now, because of the restrictions of flying over Russian airspace, they now have to make a tech stop along the way. So because this flight is no longer operated with a 757 or even 767, the 321 LR, not an XLR, but an LR, does not have the range to fly nonstop to London yet. Apparently, Air Astana is, and I'm air quoting, installing, because we don't know if they're activating already installed fuel tanks or actually physically installing additional fuel tanks that are inherent to the LR. They put the LR in 321 LR, but now they will be able to actually fly, again, nonstop to London. And Flight Global says it is and will be one of, if not the longest narrow-body flight in the world, potentially, blocked in at like 9 hours and 35 minutes. That is a long time.
Longest narrow-body flight in the world so far.
So far. It may not be the longest one. I think that award goes to, is it Iberia to Dulles? I think it is. That's a long flight, also on a 321 LR. But yeah, that's an interesting thing. I hope we find out if they're just activating or installing a fuel tank, but that's a pretty flexible aircraft.
It is. It is. So this is an interesting story, and I'm still trying to understand what exactly we're talking about here, because the initial reporting was well outside the scope of anything that was accurate. So it's taken a couple days to piece this together. And so we're going to talk about it this week, but hopefully next week we'll have a little bit more information, or we won't, and we'll just never know. But a United Airlines 757 en route from Newark to San Francisco was beginning its initial descent to San Francisco near Sacramento when it experienced a TCAS resolution advisory. The RA told the pilots to stop their descent, which they did, and then the flight continued for a safe landing in San Francisco. There were 2 aircraft in the area at the time. One was Alaska Airlines flight operated by SkyWest, so AS3304. And there was a Southwest 737 in the area as well, Southwest 4096. And this was all taking place last week on the 19th of September. The best that we can piece together so far, because the resolution advisory has been confirmed to have occurred on the United aircraft, but not on any other aircraft. So if you know how TCAS works more than we do, please email us at podcast@fr24.com, because we're trying to learn as much as we can about this, as it's still interesting to me that there wouldn't be an RA on one of the other aircraft, especially the SkyWest aircraft, because that seems like the aircraft that the United aircraft was responding to. So that'll be an interesting thing to learn more about. But the RA told the United flight to stop its descent. It stopped its descent. And then after it was clear, it continued descending for a safe landing in San Francisco.
That is a weird one, isn't it?
Yeah. They were flying near perpendicular to each other. So I don't know if that had anything to do with it. I honestly don't know at this point. So I'm keen to learn more. So I've asked some folks who I hope can help us answer this question. But we should learn more because the FAA and NTSB are both investigating. The initial report put the event hours before and hundreds of miles away from where it actually happened. The initial reporting was that this happened at 38,000 feet over Wyoming, which is a different place and a different altitude than 31,500 feet over California.
Those are different things, aren't they?
Yeah. So I don't know where the information got started, but this all came out because there was an FAA report filed because 2 people were injured on the flight. I believe 1 passenger and 1 flight attendant. Thankfully, the fasten seatbelt sign was on because they had begun their descent into San Francisco. So could have been worse, I suppose.
Yeah. And by the way, I ran the numbers and I was half right on the longest 321 flight. It is to Dulles, but I believe it is SAS from Copenhagen, not Iberia from Madrid. Yeah, so that's a nice 4,000 plus mile journey.
There you go. And then they're only going to get longer.
Yeah, mixed feelings.
Yeah, that sounds about right. You know what I don't have mixed feelings about?
Ending this podcast and going about the rest of our day.
This episode of the podcast. This has been episode 287 of AvTalk. I am Ian Petchnick here, as always, with
Jason Rabinowitz. Thanks for listening.